Hello and welcome to Tank and AFV News. My name's Tom, and today I wanted to elaborate a little bit on a statement I'd made several months ago, actually, on a different channel. I'd been invited to speak on the Military History Visualized channel. Actually, I think it was Military History Non-Visualized. So, Austrian fellow named Bernard that does those channels, and he does an excellent job. Very knowledgeable guy, and I really appreciated that opportunity. That video got way more traffic than any of the ones on my own channel because he puts out really high quality regular content. So one of the things, we're just talking, it sort of ended up being a very wide ranging interview, and one of the things I said that sort of he seemed surprised by, or at least had never really thought of before, was I said that tank engines have no commercial application. A very generalized statement, and it's something actually that I heard growing up from my father. So he had spent 47 years in the diesel tank engine field, primarily as most of his career as chief engineer for AVDS 1790 systems, which the AVDS 1790 is air-cooled diesel engine. Here I have this little model, and went in the M60 series tanks, of course, and the M88 tank retriever. As well as saw service in the Merkava tanks. Israelis put them in Centurions. Thousands and thousands of these were built. Probably the most common tank engine of the Cold War period in the Western world. I'm sure the only thing built in greater numbers was the Soviet V-12s that equipped their vehicles. So, because that was always one of the things growing up, I had an interest in tanks, so, obviously my dad's in the tank field, at least engine-wise, so, I had a lot of conversations about that, especially over the last few years once he was retired. Now, he passed away last spring, which is part of the reason I haven't been making a lot of videos, sort of had to take a little break and sort of deal with that, but I wanted to elaborate on that statement, because I think it's one of those things people don't think about engines so much. With most people, I think, get into tanks really focus more on armor and guns, sort of the stuff that affects combat effectiveness sort of on a very superficial level, like people obsessing over penetration stats and armor stats and all that stuff. With engines, it's just sort of like, well, okay, it's got an engine, it's got this much horsepower, and that's how fast the thing moves in World of Tanks or whatever game you're playing. But I always sort of I think because of my father's work, had paid more attention to these engine issues and that sort of thing. That said, I have a degree in history. I'm not an engineer. I never had the math aptitude of my father. My brain works better for remembering dates and characters and stories that make up history. So I am not a diesel expert by any stretch, but still I like to sort of keep an eye on engine development within the tank world and see where it's going. So this notion that they have no commercial application, the reason my dad would say that is because tank engines that are designed specifically for use in armored vehicles, are designed to a set of specifications that are quite different than what's required for the commercial world. The military has different needs and priorities than a commercial engines designed for a commercial world. So anything that's going to be in the power range that can move in that main battle tank that's developed commercially is going to be something probably developed for trains or boats, and it's just going to have a different set of requirements. With tanks, you have much more demanding weight limitations, size limitations, and you're willing to give up a certain amount of reliability and economy. So whereas in a commercial application, a train or a boat, weight's not as much of an issue. Size is not quite as much of an issue. Cost, reliability, efficiency are the bigger issues in very general terms. So the engines, that were my dad's career, because people used to always ask him, well, why don't you put it in a power boat, or why don't you do this? And it's like, it's just too expensive. Nobody's going to buy it for a civilian application. It's way too specialized. So that's why I always get, when you see somebody talking about putting a commercial engine into a heavy armored vehicle, I always kind of go, oh, that's kind of weird. I mean, obviously it happened back in World War II. they were adopting engines for use in tanks, but certainly in the post-war world, as you get up in more the weight range of modern MBTs, there's just not commercial engines out there that meet the requirements. So that said, I was rather surprised when I saw recently that the U.S. government had just given out a contract to BAE to develop some examples of what they're calling the M88A3. So the old M88 tank retriever. I got my M88 model right here. Actually, because that was a major part of my father's career, all sorts of M88 paraphernalia. So not just one, two drinking mugs, M88s. So a bunch of weird stuff I picked up. So, but anyway, so the M88 tank retriever, of course, is one of the last vehicles in the U.S. inventory that's that they're still producing new examples of AVDS 1790 engines for. It's the AVDS 1798 CR designation, and it's the 1,500 horsepower version of the engine. And that powers what's called the Hercules, but they're saying because the M1 Abrams, the latest versions, have gotten even heavier, the Army wants a tank retriever that is itself more powerful and heavier, that can handle that vehicle. So that's what the A3 is supposed to do. Now, what's interesting, they say that it looks like they've lengthened the vehicles because they've added a 7th road wheel, a hydro suspension, so it got rid of the torsion bars, and a different engine, which, in a way, thank God my father's passed, because M88s without a Continental AVDS 1790, I'll just say I'm glad we cremated him, because he'd be spinning in his grave. Anyhow, so I was very interested. Well, what are they going to put it in there? There's not that many other options available. And it says it's going to be a Caterpillar C32 ACERT engine. Now, I don't know much about that engine because it's not a military engine as far as I know. So I had to do a little research, and there's just not that much information out there right now online, other than just that's what the BA site says is going to be going in his vehicle. So I looked it up on the Caterpillar website, and they list, there's a couple different versions, so I'm not exactly sure the exact version, because they have like sort of a commercial propulsion version, and then they have a recreational version, which I think is more for boats. And then for both, they don't even provide like really concrete dimension stats. They provide a minimum and maximum, so they must vary a little bit, but the variation's not that big, and I'll provide stats for both just to prove my point, because regardless of which one we're talking about, it's still a very large engine compared to most of the purpose-built tank engines. So it sort of illustrates the point that I was saying earlier. So if we use the recreational engine, so the boat version, which if I had to take a guess, that's what I'm guessing, something similar to that's going into this 88. We see here the length is 83 inches, height 57, and width is 58. And total weight is 6,780 pounds. I'm sorry, not tons. Yeah, so just a tad under 6,800 pounds, so 3 tons. And that's pretty big. So let's compare that to the 1790. Now, by the way, the C13, the horsepower that they're saying, the version that's going into the M88A3 is 1,350 horsepower. The version of the 1790 that's in the current Hercules is 1,050 horsepower, so it's 300 horsepower difference. That said, the 1790 is capable of more power than that. There's 1,200 horsepower version that goes in the America 3. There's 1,500 horsepower version, at least they achieved in the test cell, and it's listed on the L3 Communications website as an option. It's just never gone into production. So the AVDS, size-wise, dimensionally, it is quite a bit shorter at 89 inches. I'm sorry, 69 inches. It is quite a bit lower at 44 inches, and it's a bit wider at 74 inches. And you can see it's because it's sort of a T-shaped, and you have these turbos that sort of stick out on the ends that increase the width as well. And then these on the edges here, these are the radiators for the oil coolers. Now that said, so this engine's, it's a bit more compact. It's not as long. It's not as tall. But there's one other thing to consider, and that's these engines are kind of apples and oranges. This guy's air-cooled. So these right here on top of the big cooling fans, like I said, you got these radiators on the side for cooling the oil, There's no water, so it's just air. So there's no water cooling system that you have to add onto this thing. This is it. You slap a transmission there, and that's your power pack. With the C32, those figures I just gave, that doesn't include the cooling system. So there's a whole big bulky water cooling system you have to put on there. So it's actually even larger than that. So to compare apples to apples, let's look at some other dimensions for some purpose-designed tank engines, particularly some MTU products, because those are probably by far the most popular in the world, I would say, and sort of the industry leader. So we could look at the MB873. This is the engine that's in the Leopard 2. Obviously, thousands of these have been built. It's been very popular. And this is not a new engine. This goes back to the 1970s. Even actually 1960s, because this is the engine originally developed for Compositor 70 and then ended up in Leopard 2. And it is, in terms of length, 67 inches, height 32 inches, width 77 inches if you take into account the turbochargers. So you can see on this picture, you see all the turbos stick out quite a bit. If you're looking at just the main section of the engine, it's 42 inches wide. So you can see it's smaller in every regard from the Cat engine, and it weighs 4,200 pounds, 4,280 pounds. So it's 2/3 the weight. And that's like I said, that's not a new engine. That's an old one. If we look at the MT883, which I think was developed more in the 90s, that's what's in Merkava 4. It's in the tropicalized version of Leclerc that I think it's EAU uses it. This one's even more compact, and so we can see its length 62 inches, 26 inches in height, 38 width, and a weight of 3,600 pounds, 3,638 pounds. So not almost half the weight of the Cat engine. And by the way, both of those MTU engines higher power. The 873 is 1,500 horsepower. The 883 is 1,400 plus. The figures kind of seem to vary a little bit on it, but 1,400 to 1,500 horses. So that gives you an example of the difference between a commercially designed engine and a specific engine designed specifically for the tank application in terms of size. So yeah, why is BA using this C32 Caterpillar? It's a good question. Maybe they wanted something produced in the US and that was the closest they could find. Frankly, if they want the vehicle to be bigger and heavier so that they can tow a bigger and heavier tank, it's one of the few times where they're trying to add weight to an armored vehicle instead of reduce it. And you know, it's funny, the website says they've stretched the vehicle out. I don't know if it's to accommodate the size of this new engine or they really did want extra length for stability or whatever other reason. I'm not an expert on tank retriever design. But anyway, it struck me as odd, so I thought I'd look up the figures and share them. So that's my thoughts on the M88A3 and the Caterpillar engine, which might be a fantastic engine. I don't know, frankly, and there's just not that many details. So if there are other people that know more about it, I'd be happy to learn more. For me, it's just sort of sad to see that it might be the end of the AVDS 1790 in the U.S. It'll still be in service for quite a while, I'm sure. You know, as far as production and we'll see, because it's an important part of the economy of Muskegon, Michigan. So hopefully it sticks around, but it looks like BA is moving in a different direction. So anyhow, hope you enjoyed this, and we'll catch you on the next one.